I've been learning a language for 7 years without ever having been to a place where people speak it. Until now. So if you're learning a language from home and you want to know whether you're just wasting your time, come with me as we talk about how to learn a language.
All fun.
What went right?
Alltså alla.
alla.
What went wrong? Meet some friends along the way.
Like if I do...
And finally find out whether learning a language like Swedish is even worthwhile at all. My name's Lamont, I do language stuff. If you like that, subscribe and välkommen, 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 välkommen till Sverige. Quick heads up, it's that time of year that you can get the biggest possible discount on language learning courses by StoryLearning. They really do only do this price once a year. It's a massive reduction in price. So if you want to learn a language or improve at a language that you already know some of, the link for that sale is in the description. It will take you directly to the sale. If that link is there, the sale should still be on, but it doesn't last long, so don't miss out. If you didn't know already, Sweden is absurdly far away from where I live. The cheapest flights take almost 2 days each way. But for me, it was further away mentally because a few years ago, I started working on a project that I knew would eventually need to be completed in Sweden. Refold. But I've really never gone that far by my own arrangement. Even when I went to Mexico last year, the foundations of that trip, that is the trip to the USA, that was all kind of laid out for me. What I mean to say is, although I knew I would need to go to Sweden at some point, obviously, it took me a while to really understand that no one was going to make the journey happen for me. And it wasn't just about money. It was about asking myself whether I really believed in this project I was working on, or even in the pursuit of learning Swedish at all. I know that some people would say that it's a waste of time, and maybe they say the same thing to you about what you want to learn, and I have thoughts on that we will come back to, but for now, since I arrived in Stockholm early in the morning after 24 hours in the air, language challenge number 1 was definitely Kaffe, because coffee is a whole language in and of itself. The same words mean different things in different places. I just told the guy outright in Swedish, I'm Australian, I would like to order, and then described the drink. How do you refer to that here in Sweden? But I just broke the rule that you're never supposed to break if you're not Swedish and you're in Sweden to speak Swedish, and that rule is don't tell people that you are from an English-speaking country because they will speak English to you. But evidently, that rule doesn't apply if your Swedish is any good, as I discovered over and over again. No one spoke English with me. Even at a hotel when I had to show my Australian ID and they gave me an agreement to sign, which said, by the way, that I wouldn't do sexy poses during my stay there. Well, consider that agreement broken, Stockholm. But despite my Australian ID, the entire conversation remained in Swedish and remained at a normal pace. And when she did give me the agreement to sign, she gave me the Swedish one. And I know they had an English one. So what the rule really seems to be is, if you want people to speak Swedish to you, speak Swedish to them. But preferably well. Which sounds like a catch-22. You can't get good at the language if people won't first speak the language with you, right? Well, no. Mostly my Swedish is the result of what I call SAMCI, self-administered mass cognitive immersion. Self-administered meaning you're the one putting yourself in a situation where you're going to learn the language, and mass cognitive immersion meaning large amounts of soaking your brain in the language using material that is in that language, such as audiobooks, videos, podcasts, articles, etc. Cognitive meaning of the brain. You don't need to go anywhere to immerse your brain in the language. You can use any material that is written or recorded in the language. I spoke more about the difference between cognitive language immersion and lifestyle language immersion in this video here. And mass doesn't refer to watching 4 or 5 whole movies. Mass cognitive immersion is measured in hundreds of hours. I used to be very vocal about the benefits of speaking early and speaking a lot. Basically just having as many conversations as possible and pushing through the discomfort of speaking a foreign language. So I was literally vocal, both in and about my language learning. And honestly, that approach does boast impressive early results. You're able to converse on certain topics in weeks or sometimes even days. But I also found that it had a very low ceiling on your ability, because once you're able to say all that stuff, you can then sort of get away with saying everything, so long as you're happy for it to be wrong or to sound really weird, and you're happy to spend a good few seconds thinking about everything before you say it. And if you're thinking, well, yeah, that's no big deal, then imagine that you had to do that before every single thing you wanted to say. So what happens is, instead of your competence and natural fluency increasing in the language, you just get better at saying things that no native speaker would ever say, and at avoiding beginning sentences that are too complex for you to complete. You could think of the speak early, speak a lot approach as a lot like learning to play every piece of music ever written with the same 5 chords. These are the 5 chords I mean. Most of what you played would sound pretty close, but it would rarely be completely right, and there'd be some pieces of music that were completely unrecognizable. Mass cognitive immersion, on the other hand, is like learning which chords correspond to every musical sound that you might hear, so that when you want to produce the music yourself, you know exactly which chords to use to make the sound that you have in mind. The rest of my first day in Stockholm was great, packed with language adventures. In Gamla Stan, I find my first second-hand bookshop and I buy 4 books, and I think, yes, this is a sensible number of books to carry. They will not multiply at an alarming rate until I get an angry Albanian man shouting at me about them. I don't think. Foreshadowing. But the next day I was gone, out of there, whoosh. First thing in the morning, early train to Hallsberg, snabbtåg, fast train. Now it's early in the morning and the train is well under half full. But before it leaves, this guy comes and sits next to me, and I'm looking around like, what a weird thing for a Swedish person to do. So strange was this behavior that I thought, there's a reason for this. And then I think, fan. Är det möjligt att när jag bokade biljetten så bokade jag en viss plats? Checked my phone. Yes, that's exactly what had happened. I was in the wrong seat of the wrong carriage, and this guy was just too polite to tell me that I was actually in his seat. So he was being perfectly Swedish. Short version of the story, this generated 3 different conversations, because first I had to explain it to this guy whose seat I was in, and then as I was doing that, a ticket inspector lady came, asked to see my ticket, and I said I'm in the wrong seat, and she was like, that's cool, you need to be down there. And this being her place of work, I trusted her, so I went down there to take my seat, but now on the wrong carriage, because by down there, she meant up there. But before I'd gotten a chance to move, a different ticket inspector guy came along, asked to see my ticket, and I had to explain the whole story, starting from the beginning, to him. Do you get all that? So, there's a travel hack for you, language learners. Sit in the wrong seat multiple times. In Sweden, at least, you don't get in trouble, you just have to explain yourself a lot. It's good practice. And while we're on that, you might be thinking, wait, but didn't you say that speaking a lot isn't the best way to do this? Yes, the SAMCI method would say that it's a bad idea early in your language learning when you still don't have a good grasp of the language and therefore have to guess at a lot of what you should say.
You pick out a couple of words and you throw them together and you hope it makes sense.
And the thinking behind waiting until you've got a good grasp of the language before speaking, or at least before speaking a lot, can be explained by thinking about what might happen when you say something that a native speaker understands but sounds really weird or is just straight up wrong. I was haved very a nice time. Sometimes you'll get corrected. You were having a very nice time, yeah? I were having a very nice time, yes? No, sorry, was is right because it's I. I was having a very nice time. Which is a pretty inefficient way to hear one thing said correctly once, and that's assuming you get corrected at all, which probably won't happen, and some research suggests is not good for your learning anyway. What I was doing while I was in Sweden was different, because I've now consumed enough Swedish that the kind of mistake that's in that example would not even occur to me to say, just like it wouldn't occur to you to say, "We garage car," to taking are now. So once you've consumed a lot of the language and you understand it well, what speaking it in decent quantities does is firstly to turn up knowledge gaps to tell you what you don't know how to say, and secondly to increase the brain's readiness to send that movement to the tongue. And this is a very real thing. One example was when I was standing outside a packed sports bar on the night of the Euro football final, hence the crowdedness, and I saw this woman about to try to enter holding like a small flower, like a delicate looking plant, just open, and it just looked like trouble to me. So I said something to the effect of, "Oj, jag skulle inte tipsa om att försöka tränga dig in där." And she turns around and says, "Sorry, I don't speak Swedish."
Va?
To which my immediate response was to try to formulate the same meaning with a different set of words, but still in Swedish.
Alltså vänta nu, vad är det som händer nu?
I got like 2 or 3 words into that sentence before realizing, hang on, you wanted it in English. What I think was happening was that I'd spent enough time in Swedish recently that I'd essentially switched my default languages. So when I heard her ask me to speak English, my rapid response was like, "Oh yeah, sure, that's the easy one. When we're asked to speak English, we just say this," grabbed the default box and got a few words in before realizing, no, that's still Swedish. I feel that increasing the brain's readiness to put thoughts into the language and also making that feel so easy that it will even default to that, then has downstream benefits to your actual skills and ability, on top of what it does for your comfort and your confidence, obviously. So there are definitely benefits to being in the country and speaking the language in decent quantities, but those are much greater once you have a level of competence in the language. Now, please don't hear me saying, don't go to the country, you won't learn the language like that, it doesn't work. Of course you can do that, and if that's what you want to do, then that's what you should do. I'm just saying that it's not the only option and probably not even the best option.
Några minuter så ankommer vi Hallsberg. Hallsberg nästa uppehåll.
I was in Hallsberg for 2 days. I mostly hung out in cafes, sitting as near to people as is culturally acceptable so as to eavesdrop.
And I started a very popular blog about their personal lives.
Okay, the last part was a joke, but the eavesdropping was not. I did a lot of it on trains as well, and I'm just going to say right now that my eavesdropping skills in English are much better than they are in Swedish. And I mention this because it goes back to something that I said in a video a couple of months ago. Fluency is not something that can be measured on one axis or even 3 axes. You're trying to put a number on consciousness itself, multiple aspects of consciousness interacting simultaneously. The people whom I was listening to were probably not using many or even any words or phrases that I didn't understand. It's just that without the full context of what they're talking about, plus all the words that are inaudible because of noise and music and whatever, I'm drawing on all the horsepower that I have in Swedish to try to understand what they're saying. In English, I've got oodles of comprehension horsepower, and it's normally more than I need. Some things that might call on that kind of comprehension horsepower are fast song lyrics, rap, poetry, certain stand-up comedy.
Give them the cone or speed off, zigzagging in and out of traffic.
And yes, sometimes eavesdropping. In Swedish, those things are often near to or sometimes beyond my comprehension capacity. And I mention this for you, anyone who is anywhere in your language learning, and you feel like you're playing snakes and ladders. Some days, everything's perfect, and you feel as fluent as you are in your native language. And other days, you could swear that someone has switched the language out with a different one as a joke. This happens mostly because of the unseen level that different activities require. And often what's easy versus what's hard in the target language is counterintuitive. I've mentioned before that Kids shows, for example, are sometimes harder to understand than adult shows.
Hon gillar bara växter. Jag avskyr växter!
My point being, try not to be discouraged. Some things are easy. Some things are hard. Which things are easy and hard is not always what you think. It's not always linear. You're basically rebuilding your consciousness. It's not always going to make sense. In Hallsberg, I had some of my favorite conversations for the entire trip. One was with this guy who saw me setting up my gimbal and wanted to know all about it because he'd never seen one before. Honestly, I was not the best person to ask because not only is explaining what a gimbal is used for really pushing the limits of my Swedish, but also because it was only the second time I'd tried to use it, I was supposed to be practicing with it for resorsak. I think that I got away with the guy just thinking that I was some idiot who had bought equipment that he didn't understand the function of, rather than thinking I was some idiot who couldn't explain what it did in Swedish. The reality was it was a bit of both. But another conversation that I remember and I'm quite proud of is when my friend picked me up later that day and we then had like a 30-minute drive and we spoke Swedish the entire time. Now, I know that doesn't sound like that big a deal. It's like, she's Swedish, I speak Swedish, we're in Sweden. But the thing is, actually neither of us is Swedish. My friend Louise is what you might call literally English. I really can't think of an explanation as to why we spoke Swedish other than we forgot. Obviously, on some level, I knew that we were both speaking Swedish, but it just didn't occur to me that it didn't really make sense. I was due to head back into the middle of the country around Hallsberg 11 days later for resorsak. But first I had a cheap flight for an entirely different country, so I started heading back into Stockholm, staying a day and a night on the way in Västerås because it was one more city that I could see. Yeah, okay, that sounds very nice, mate, but let's be honest, it's because it was cheap. But Västerås does have some beautiful parts. I wasn't there for very long. There was so much that I didn't have time to explore. I never went up north, for example. I never went across to Göteborg. I certainly didn't get to Norway or down to Denmark. This cheap hotel here was not exactly the highlight of Västerås, but it was here that I recorded this video in which I get a bit emotional because I think that this day was the day that it really hit home that I was actually in Sweden. Some people who watched that video didn't understand at all what I meant by knowing something as a fact, like knowing that it was true, without actually believing that it was real until I could see it with my own eyes. But I know it's not just me, because PewDiePie uploaded a video recently in which he describes the exact same experience in Australia.
I mean, I knew about Australian beaches, but they really are incredible. The sand is so pure.
This is exactly the same feeling as I was expressing about knowing how the sun didn't go down in summer. Like, I knew that as a fact, obviously, but I was still somewhat awestruck when I actually saw it. And the details of what I did that day, starting with catching the train from Kumla, which is to say nowhere special. Förlåt Kumla, jag vet inte. Jag är rätt säker att det finns någonting där som är speciellt. Ni är speciella för mig. And talking to a woman at the station about changes to the train timetable and which train we could possibly catch and whatever. It was all so remarkably unremarkable. And the day just continued like that. I had another 8 to 10 boring conversations in Swedish about nothing special. It was just a normal, boring day. And I think that's what got to me at the hotel. I was like, I've just lived a day in Sweden that is an ordinary day for anyone who lives here. I could probably just call this video Happy Australian Guy Rants About Sweden or something. I don't know. In part 2, we're going to talk about the guy who wanted to call the cops on me.
Alltså, jag vet inte, Daniel.
We're going to find out where I went when I left Sweden for 2 days. And we're going to talk more about language skills and immersion and whether I've been wasting my time learning Swedish.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hey guys, it's midnight as I'm finishing this video. Part 2 was supposed to be ready for the same time, but as you can see, these videos take just a little bit of work, so my apologies for part 2 still being a few days away. I really appreciate you watching this so soon, and I want to thank Refold, who have gone out of their way to extend their awesome deals because of my lateness. Now, only when using the link that is in the description can you get their great Black Friday deals, which when using the link are extended until this Friday the 6th of December, so check those out and thank you Refold. And now I will leave you in peace while I march headlong into editing part 2. Vi ses där. Hej!